So in this video, I'll be using clay to build a cell membrane and talk about the structure of a cell membrane and how it's related to its function and the roles of proteins, carbohydrates, and cholesterol in the plasma membrane. So the cell, one of the main parts of the cell is the cell membrane. And the cell membrane is a fluid structure, or the plasma membrane, and it has a crucial role in maintaining homeostasis of the cells of the body. So these blue little clay balls that I made represent the phosphate portion or the polar portion of what's called a phospholipid. It's a lipid is a fat, and phospholipids have two fatty acid tails. And these tails are nonpolar, so they don't like water, and the polar head likes water. Another way to say that is the polar head is hydrophilic and the tails are hydrophobic. So oil and water is polar, and oil, which is a fat, is nonpolar. They repel each other. They don't mix unless they're shaken up vigorously. So the cell membrane is mainly made up of these phospholipids, which I'm making, and they form what's called a phospholipid bilayer, or two essentially layers of phospholipids. But the interesting thing, and it's due to its chemical properties, is these phospholipids don't line up in like this. I'll show you. They don't line up like this. You see that? Instead, due to their chemical properties, they flip like so. Just like that. And I'll add a few more here. The tails. I'm using the brown clay for the tails and the blue clay for the phosphate portion. No, this isn't perfect, but these little phosphate tails or fatty acid tails are kind of want to stick to me. Okay, so pretend here this is going to go all the way around this way and this way and go around the entire cell. If we were to draw it out. And this would be the outside of the cell, which is a watery environment. This would be the inside of the cell, which is also an aqueous or water environment. Maybe I'll just write that down here so you can see that this is the outside of the cell, inside of the cell. Just helps with the visual. Oops. So this is outside cell, inside cell. And you probably can't read that too well, but just to give you an idea. And remember, this goes all the way around in a circular pattern. So this is the phospholipid bilayer. Now, this is continuous through the whole cell, and it's because the fatty acid tails is really oily in here and not oily on the outside. And this gives some flexibility to the cell membrane. Also within the cell membrane, we see many proteins, and I'm going to use proteins as green. Little dramatic light effect. I'll enter the protein. Now, proteins can have different functions in the plasma membrane. They can function as receptors. I'll give a little receptor here, which means they can grab certain ions or messages coming in like this, and literally those ions or different chemicals will land on that receptor and then transmit that information to the inside of the cell. A lot of proteins can be what are called transport proteins. So they span the entire layer, the bilayer, called a transmembrane protein, and something will essentially travel through this. It'll make like a little tunnel and go through the cell membrane. Now the cell membrane, the reason why it has these transport proteins is because it's selectively permeable, meaning it doesn't let everything go through, which is a good thing. Things that are too big or that you don't want in the cell all the time. It only lets, essentially, these proteins are like doors. They open and close when the cell needs something, and something like sodium or potassium can get through into the inside of the cell or outside of the cell through these protein channels, these transport proteins. Now, but other things like gases, oxygen, carbon dioxide, can go through the cell pretty readily. Larger things like larger sugar molecules or ions, like I said, sodium, potassium, need some help through proteins to do that. I'm adding some more phospholipids here because I'm add some more things to the cell membrane here that are important to maintaining homeostasis of the cell. And it appears as though my fatty acid tails are getting longer as I go, but that's okay. You get the idea. So we've talked about phospholipids, which are the main component of these plasma membranes. And also within them are these proteins. And proteins can have different roles. A few of them are receptors and then transport proteins. Also within the cell membrane, we have carbohydrates. And I'm going to represent carbohydrates with the yellow clay. Now, carbohydrates are sugars, a lot of people think of that, and energy molecules. They can attach to lipids in the cell membranes and be a glycolipid, or they can attach to proteins and be a glycoprotein. A lot of times they're just hanging out on the outside, like that, right? Maybe this one's going to be attached to a protein, so glycoprotein. Now, their role is to help the cells identify themselves as self cells or non-self cells, and that has to do with the immune system. So the cells in your body know that they're the cells in your body, and they also know, or they can recognize, which cells do not belong to your body. They can also form what's called a glycocalyx to help, essentially, in the immune system, help fight disease. Also, and also just protect the inside linings of your body, like your blood vessels, for example, have a lot of fluid going through them, so they need to be extra protected, and that carbohydrates help to do that, so the blood vessels can stay intact. Another molecule that you'll find in the cell membrane is cholesterol, and I'm using the red clay to represent the cholesterol. And the cholesterol, and you might have had a negative view of cholesterol because you hear about high cholesterol in people's diets and how they can make them more prone to, like heart attacks and things like that. I'm going to get you closer here now that I'm done building. Other way. Fabulous. All right. So I put the cholesterol by the fatty acid tails. Now, there's good cholesterol and there's bad cholesterol. Obviously, you don't want a lot of bad cholesterol. Foods high in cholesterol, like red meat, for example. But good cholesterol you want. And the reason why is cholesterol goes in the cell membrane by the fatty acid tails and helps keep it fluid, meaning easy to move. And that's important to maintaining homeostasis. If you didn't have enough cholesterol, the good type in your diet, the cell membrane wouldn't function as it should. Now, one of the cool things about the cell membrane is called the fluid mosaic model. And that's just a fancy word for that things within the cell membrane can move around if they need to. So let's say this protein needs to move somewhere else in this bilayer. And I'm trying to move it. It can actually get up and it will just scoochie on over. And since it's fluid, the cell membrane can close and repair itself. And that membrane or that protein can move to another part of the cell where it's needed. And that's just a quick view of how the plasma membrane's structure is related to its function and how it helps maintain homeostasis. We talked about phospholipids. We talked about proteins, different examples, carbohydrates, and cholesterol in the cell membrane or plasma membrane, same thing.